clinical significance of this, that's why I keep saying, if you can understand this concept I'm trying to teach you about the plasma membrane, you're going to understand everything about anatomy and physiology. So this is extremely clinically significant. You go into your programs, they're going to expect you to know this, which is why I'm going to continue to teach this. We will keep encountering this probably every topic we talk about, just about. So sometimes medications are actually made to attach to proteins in a plasma membrane. That's how advanced some medications can get. When materials attach to a protein but don't move across the protein, across the membrane, usually we say they are linked to these little 3 proteins that I kind of was trying to show. We usually say they're linked to a G protein complex because of the energy, GDP, all right? And they will simply move forward to do activities in the cell, which we will continue to come back to, okay? This won't be the only time we talk about this. But if you can remember that we have these proteins, these receptor proteins, that can just accept the chemical signal, make that protein in the membrane have some type of activity, it moves forward to those little 3 proteins that we refer to as the G protein complex. All right? So, another type of protein in that cell membrane. Does anybody know about how many types we've talked about so far in the plasma membrane? Proteins, their functions, the different types that are existing. I've lost count. 5 different ones? Does that include, Michelle, the ones that are acting as like the ligand gated and voltage gated, counting these 2 separate ones? Mm-hmm. Okay, so right, like I said, I had lost count. So we are seeing now. Do you guys remember how in the very beginning I talked about, you know, if someone says the nucleus is the most important part, I would kind of argue with them a little bit, okay? Because we are still looking at this plasma membrane and these proteins that are embedded into it. So now I can have a protein in the plasma membrane of a cell that can now be an enzyme, meaning they can help with reactions. So I could have a molecule that could be something, for example, that is needing to get broken down. It needs the bond to get broken so that these component parts can move into the cell. So they're showing us 2 amino acids connected together. For example, if we had our breakfast and as the foodstuffs are getting broken down, one of the things we begin to do is take proteins and break them down so that we can get those amino acids, but we need them to be individuals. So we need to take the chain of amino acids, for example, and break it down. We can have embedded into our membrane, phospholipid membrane, a protein that can do that. If, for example, these 2 amino acids still connected can fit into the protein structure. It can catalyze the reaction, break the bond, and I now have 2 amino acids that can go into the cell. So is that up to 6 now? Think about the size of a cell. They're microscopic. We've mentioned in this plasma membrane the phospholipids. We're going to have cholesterols in there. We've talked about all these proteins now. So this means they do not have to be present in huge amounts. Proteins can continue to do the same job over and over and over, so that that cell doesn't need to keep, because wait a minute, how are these proteins in this plasma membrane getting made? Oh, the plot thickens, as they say. Once again, the nucleus of the cell, which has our chromosomes in it, which contain our genetic material. A gene on that DNA codes for these proteins. So the cell does work to make these proteins. But it doesn't have to continually focus on that, because once it makes it and that protein gets embedded into the plasma membrane, because it can work over and over and over and over, the cell might not ever need to make it again until it duplicates and the whole cell starts over again. So the nucleus, the gene on our DNA, is coding for these proteins to be made. They just don't leave the cell. They simply get embedded into that plasma membrane. So some of them act as an enzyme, something that will help us break materials down so that we can get those independent pieces into the cell to be used. So if we look at the proteins we've talked about, 1, 2, under transport, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. 7 different types. Markers, attachments, channels, carriers, ATP powered, receptors, enzymes. Each one having a specific job. But wait a minute. We're not done. Because the plasma membrane still has other things to do for the cell. Movement now that can occur through the plasma membrane, but this time the movements can be by diffusion, osmosis, or what is termed mediated. Each cell of the body has a specific job. Sometimes those cells need to get materials quicker than other cells. So we have movement that can occur in a more fast way, okay? But sometimes we need that movement to be at equilibrium. Sometimes we need to be able to have materials simply just doing this number, back and forth, back and forth. Some of this movement helps with that because we are animal cells, we are in a fluid environment. The last thing we need is for something to be not at equilibrium. That can put pressures on a cell and make the cell die. So, one of the ways that we can have movement is diffusion, which we defined earlier. Movement of molecules, movement of particles, okay? Solutes. It's movement of something, movement of a molecule of some sort. Their movement is simply from the area of high concentration to low concentration. What this means, the materials simply move down their concentration gradient. They just simply go from high to low. There's no energy involved. It is in just simple diffusion. Some molecules we have in the body just simply get to go from wherever they may be in high amount to an area in low amount. What areas in the body am I referring to?
What?
Do what?
Maybe blood?
Now, if we think about that, because blood is transporting our materials, okay? So if we think about that, all right, the way blood moves through the body is by way of vessels, okay? So we're going to have a blood vessel, and in this blood vessel are, let's just term this for right now, materials. Okay? So right now, there are materials. All tissues of our body, well, almost all, most, are vascularized, meaning they have a blood supply. So if I'm at a tissue level, okay, vascularization is present, vessels are present, and in this tissue are going to be cells. Is everybody following me? And at this tissue level, this means I have my extracellular fluid surrounding my cells, which have intracellular fluid. My blood vessels are cellular, with all the blood and stuff moving through it. So materials will get to move in and out from the blood, okay? And materials can go from the extracellular fluid to the cell, in and out. Does that make sense? So we have movement of our materials, these particles. So in the case of diffusion.